Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Embers, where we look at a smaller question in the longer videos. So, here's the question. In Lost in Space, how did the J2 get back to the Resolute from the Amber Planet in the final episodes of Season 2? We know that the Jupiter 2 was parked on the metal ring, took the lightning blast, and then got back up to the Resolute. How that happens is very, very confusing. Several things, and they're all pretty conflicting when it comes to this question. So, let's look at the facts. The Jupiter 2 was parked on the ring of the Amber Planet before the lightning strike, which resurrected Scarecrow and awakened the 100 Silver Robots, including their leader Mohawk. Now, before this, the Jupiter 2 has been shown to be able to take that exact level of lightning blast without suffering any serious cosmetic damage. Maybe some light scorching, but nothing that would seriously mar the hull of the Jupiter. What does mar both the hulls of the Jupiter and the Resolute is the thermal blasts from the robots. Those are two very distinctly different damage patterns we see. One from the lightning, which the Jupiter 2 got on the methane planet when Maureen used the lightning bolts to reboot the dead engines, and then the thermal blasts, which are shown on the inside and outside of the Resolute after the initial attack from the robot. And you can see as the camera, it pans over the Jupiter 2 in scenes immediately before and immediately after Scarecrow's resurrection. Before, there are no major thermal blast injuries on the outside of the Jupiter 2. After, there are at least a half a dozen major thermal blast injuries of a magnitude that's much stronger than anything SAR or robot left on the Resolute. And yet, the Jupiter 2 is still spaceworthy, when the robots have been shown to be able to punch straight through the holes of the Resolute itself, let alone a Jupiter. Interesting. And we also know that Will Robinson does not know how to fly the Jupiter. This was stated at least 3 times in the canon, and so the show is making a deal of it. It's a point that Will cannot fly the Jupiters. And this was especially brought up by Ben the Adler right before his heroic self-sacrifice. He tells Will he'll have to wait in the Jupiter for pickup. But we now know that wasn't an option because the robots woke up right after Scarecrow's resurrection. Now, the show makes a point of Victor saying he was piloting the J2 and that all the other Jupiters were destroyed and the remaining colonists were on the Jupiter 2. This is important because it means that it reinforces the fact that Will can't fly the Jupiters. It shows you that Victor is a trained pilot, but the last we saw him he was just a few minutes before the lightning strike, safely in the base camp. We know that it's at least over 60 miles, if not much further, from where they were on the road. So the fact that he has the rest of the colonists with him means that they all had to load onto the Jupiter. Now, Victor might have risked his own life going to rescue Will, but he would not have risked the rest of the colonists by crowding them all into one Jupiter, flying them out to where Will was, losing the Jupiter with all the colonists on them, loading them all up into the J2, and then flying the J2. So, this heavily implies that the J2 got from the ring, where it was parked, back to the main colony camp. And Will can't fly the J2, and there were no other humans there with him. And the J2s do not have the navigational capacity for suborbital flight on their own. They don't have that kind of auto-nav. It might have been, someone might be able to program it, but that would take several days at least. So, someone or something got the J2 from that point on the ring where all the robots were waking up to the main encampment. And it did that not only managing to fly it, but managing to protect it from the hostile robots, who have been shown perfectly willing to crisp anyone on sight. So, this leaves us with a question. How did the Jupiter get from the ring to the colony? Once it's at the camp, it's fairly simple. Victor DeHar, super boss that he is, herds all the colonists up, loads them onto the J2, and flies them out of there, with the robots seemingly ignoring them in favor of going after the engine. But again, this doesn't make sense. The robots made it to the colony camp too, as you can tell by the fact that all the rest of the Jupiters were destroyed, but there were still living colonists left. If the Jupiters had been in the air when the robots destroyed them, that wouldn't have left survivors. That means the Jupiters were on the ground. They were either incapacitated but not destroyed, or destroyed after the colonists had evacuated them. Now, assuming the silver robots didn't give them fair warning, send them a couple warning shots and give them time to evacuate the Jupiters, this is just a very confusing situation, and it's too heavily noted that this is what is going on in the series for this just to be bad writing. There are very deliberate tells that this is going to be important later on. Now, if the robots didn't kill them, but the robots were perfectly willing to kill them, what happened? Well, the obvious answer, the only robot on that planet who was going to be less than murderous towards the humans was Scarecrow. Now that's a pretty tough day on Scarecrow. He gets resurrected and immediately has to scare off 100 other robots from the Jupiter 2. He then has to hack the Jupiter 2, fly it to the colony without anybody noticing, whereupon Victor would take over from there. But this is not outside of the robot's stated capabilities. If you remember, Robot Robinson easily hacked the systems on the J2 to print out the gun for Will. Way back at the beginning of the season, it was one of the first things he did. And Robot Robinson had a lot of knowledge about humans and the material strength and probably the systems of the J2. So it's entirely possible, given the show's internal logic, that Scarecrow had these capacities too, especially given how much longer Scarecrow has been in human company. Now, it is a bit of a stretch to assume that one lone robot of Scarecrow's, even of Scarecrow's combat skill, could have fought off 100 other robots. But remember, he didn't have to defeat them, he just had to make taking the J2 more expensive for them than it was worth. The robots were clearly after something on the Resolute, presumably Robot and or his engine, and they were singularly focused on that. They did take the time to crisp all of the other colonists' Jupiters, but if what happened was this, there is an explanation. Scarecrow wakes up, fully understanding the situation. The silver robots wake up having downloaded either through the ring or from Scarecrow what was going on. Scarecrow immediately leaps to the defense of the J2, which Will wouldn't be able to see trapped inside the way he was. And Scarecrow manages to fend off the other robots enough to know that taking him and therefore the J2 will delay them, and they don't want to be delayed. So the robots load up into their ship, fly out over the colony camp, destroy the J2s from high altitude, possibly debilitating them with something along the lines of an electromagnetic pulse. That's definitely within their capacities. And in fact, one massive pulse that destroys the Jupiter's ability to fly would be a good explanation of why all the colonists were alive, but their Jupiters were destroyed. So the robots fly over the colony camp, debilitate the Jupiters, and then Scarecrow is left on the successfully defended J2, which Scarecrow then hacks, probably from the outside, flies to the colony camp, and lands. Victor Dahar herds the surviving colonists on board, assuming that Will somehow managed to fly the Jupiter, and flies the Jupiter back to the Resolute. And I think this handily explains all the very heavily lamp-shaded issues with that final escape of the Jupiter 2 from the Ember planet back to the Resolute. Now, this is supported by the fact that Scarecrow did eventually show up and defended Will and the rest of the children on the T8 from the silver robots. It does raise the question, however, of where Scarecrow was in the time between the Jupiter docking with the Resolute and when he showed up in the hallway to rescue Will. Presumably he was running around the Resolute following some project of his own, which might have included getting a heavily injured Ben Adler to one of those handy little cryopods, but that's a speculation for another video. So there you have it. There's my theory. Scarecrow wakes up completely restored, jumps on top of the Jupiter 2, defends it from the attacking silver robots to the point that the robots no longer consider the J2 a target worth the cost of taking. The silver robots hop in their ship, beat the J2 to the colony, send out a pulse or a weapon of some sort that debilitates the rest of the Jupiters, leaving the humans unharmed, but the Jupiters useless. Scarecrow lands the hacked J2. Victor Dahar rushes aboard, assuming Will somehow managed to fly it. And then Victor Dahar flies them back to the Resolute with Scarecrow clinging onto the outside, which, given the robot's capacities, does not seem out of the question. Scarecrow then spends a good chunk of the episode running around doing something of his own design. So, there's my theory. What do you think of it? Leave a like if you agree. Leave a comment if you want to atomize my theory at a particle level. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.